Welcome back to the Custom Cabinet Estimator tutorial series. In this tutorial we'll be looking at setting up and managing the second of 6 defaults, this one being markups. From the dashboard we'll go to the default setup and choose markups. As always, we come to our list view, which when the lists are this short, this is not a real helpful place to be. You need to get on into one of the markups, and we'll just start with the first one and look at the kind of the makeup first, and then we'll talk about markups a little bit afterwards, as we've done in labor rates and in terms. So here's just a typed description, and as you notice, the 3 here, or the 4 that are listed here, are the type of client specific. So the first 2 being typical builder markups, one being multiple payment terms, one being net. These 2, well actually this one is a second scenario and this being a third scenario. So the second scenario being you're working with a design showroom and they're reselling your product, and then the 4th being an individual dealing with them with multi-payment terms. And you can have as many of these as you want. You just come up here and create the structure and add your markups to it, and so you can have different pricing structures for different types of clients or different scenarios. And in this case we're looking at the typical builder markup multi-payment terms. So in this case we're going to get something down and then get something as some sort of progress payment and then something at conclusion. And our markups can be different for someone who's going to pay maybe 100% up front, as opposed to someone who's going to pay net terms and take 30 days after we complete the job to pay, and someone who's going to give us some payments. So you could have different markups for those different scenarios. So here we have our sales commission and then our design fee, and these 2 components are really working on a percentage basis instead of a dollar basis, but they're labor components for your project. They're people that work for you that are going to be providing this, or in the case of in the design showroom you might discount this, make this very low because they're doing the sales process. And in my case, when I was doing that, I found that that's true. They were doing the sales process, so I still had to do some portion of it, so I had 2% in there. But you notice that the design fee went from 5 to 8% because typically they provided a poor design that I had to do a lot of work on before I could go to engineering. Then this little radio button selector here is show design fee on estimate, and you can say yes or no. It will include it either way, how much the design fee is, but it'll just include it in your totals if you say no, and then it'll actually show what the design fee is if you say yes within the printed structure of the estimate and or proposal. Then your overhead markup, and again you're going to really need to think about this overhead and then your profit markup as they relate to margins and markups, and so we're going to talk about that in just a minute. Then you have an additional field here, and you're seeing that this field is green. If a field is associated with money, if it's going to cost you something if you leave it blank, we're going to make that green when it's blank. And so this field, although this is an optional field, so it's fine that it is green, we do want it to be green to say there could be a cost implication to you not answering this question. In this case, for this builder, I wouldn't have an additional, but now I may have typical builder's markup and then replace the word typical with the builder's name, and they might get an additional 5 or 10% markup because they're slow to pay, or because their job sites are very difficult to work on, or difficult work conditions, or they're not ready when they say they'll be ready, things like that. So you can certainly use this additional percentage for a positive or negative implication. And then you have your tax layout here, and so far we haven't had anyone, after we redesigned it 2 or 3 times back in the early days of the program, we haven't had anybody say, hey, this doesn't work in my state, now that we've made it this complicated. But basically your sales tax rate, and then how's it applied. Show sales tax on reports, yes or no, and that would do just what the design fee does. It includes it either way, but one shows a line item called sales tax and one includes the sales tax in each line item throughout the estimate proposal. The sales tax on materials, yes. Yes with markups, no. And in some states, that's why this whole column is here, is are they not allowed to charge sales tax on the markup, or they don't charge sales tax on the markup. So you have no sales tax on labor, no sales tax on installation because that is labor, and no sales tax on delivery. And these are specific to Tennessee, but your state would be different and you could answer them appropriately. Now let's look at navigating through here. Obviously this one being a very small one, you can just simply move up and down this sub list here, and this sub list would allow you to move from one to the other and compare and edit. If you need to change one number in all of them, you could come to them very quickly. Now let's switch gears and go back to that discussion we've had in earlier tutorials, and let me switch to a PowerPoint presentation. So we're going to revisit this subject, markups versus margins, and what's the difference. Alright, the percentages you enter as markups in Business Partner should take into consideration the difference in markups and margins. In all my years of supporting Business Partner users, and leading True 32 training workshops, this has been one of the most difficult things I've had to teach. It seems that even now, after years of teaching this subject matter, I still fall short of making a comprehensive presentation that provides the business partner user a sound foundation to stand on. Hopefully the following illustrations will rectify that, or at least provide the tools to reference when you need them. Again, for clarity's sake, let's review the difference in markups and margins that we looked at in the labor rates tutorial. And just as we did in that tutorial, we will start with definitions. Margin is sales minus the cost of goods sold. For example, if you sell a project for $1,000 and it cost you $700 to make it, your margin would be $300. If you state the same thing as a percentage, your margin was 30%. So the math on that looks like this: $300, your margin, divided by $1,000, the sale, equals 0.3 or 30%. Markup is the amount you increase the cost by to determine your selling price. For example, a $300 markup added to the $700 cost yields a $1,000 selling price. If you state the same thing as a percentage, the markup percentage is 42.86. So note that in the margin calculation, we had a 30% margin, and in the markup, it took a 42.86 or almost 43% markup to give us the same margin. And that expresses out like this: $300, which is our markup, divided by $700, our job cost, equals 0.4286 or 42.86%. The main point I want to make, again, is that if you mark your costs up 30%, you need to understand that you will not make a 30% margin or profit. In reality, you will make a 23% profit margin if you mark your costs up by 30%. Maybe a list of the differences between the most common margins and the markup percentages required to get them would be useful. So if you marked up your job by 11.1%, you would only get a 10% margin. And watch how this grows as the numbers get larger. If you marked your job up 25%, then you would only earn a 20% margin. If you marked your job up 42.9%, then you would earn a 30% margin. If you marked your job up 80%, you would only earn a 40% margin. And then of course the largest case here is the biggest difference. If you marked your job up a full 100%, you would earn a 50% margin. And that should be very telling there. If you want to calculate the markup required to achieve a specific margin, the calculation is desired margin divided by cost. So in our case, our desired margin is $300, and we would divide that by our cost, $700, and that tells us that from this point forward, we'd like to mark up our jobs by 0.42857 or 42.857%. Since most of us don't think in terms of the desired dollar amount of a margin that we want, but think in terms of desired margin percentage, 30%, a more useful calculation is to use a reciprocal, and we've talked about that before, and let's go through and take a look at this. So using our example job cost of $700 and assuming you wanted to make a 30% margin on that $700 in job cost, we could use the reciprocal of 0.30 or 30, which is 70. So the calculation is $700 job cost divided by 0.70, the reciprocal of 30. 70 plus 30 is 100, so that's why 70 is the reciprocal of 30. So the math looks like this: $700 job cost divided by 0.70, the reciprocal of 30, equals $1,000. So our desired margin expressed in dollars and cents looks like this: $1,000 sale minus our $700 job cost equals a $300 margin. If we use the desired margin divided by cost calculation, it looks like this: $300, which is our desired margin, divided by $700, our job cost, equals 0.42857 or 42.857%. To get a 30% margin, we would need to use a 42.857 markup, which would look like this: $700 job cost multiplied by 1.42857, our markup, would give us our $1,000 sales price. So to earn a 30% margin on our $700 job cost, we would need to mark up our job cost by just a tad less than 43%. Contrast that same math with a 30% markup, and it looks like this: $700 job cost multiplied by 1.30, or a 30% markup, and you only get $910. So instead of a 30% margin of $300, you achieve a 23% margin of $210. That's it for this video tutorial on default markups. Next we will look at default materials and hardware in Custom Cabinet Estimator. Thanks for watching.